Okay, so thank you everyone for being here today with us. It's been a very long and exciting journey so far in this systems innovation learning series that we started in February with our first systems innovation event. And now we are in the second session of the systems change module. It's our fourth module here in the learning series. And today we're talking about the tools on systems change. And this is, as I said, this is part of the learning series that I'm going to present a bit better later on. But before we start, so my name is Yasmin. I am going to host and facilitate today's session alongside my colleague Joss Colchester, who's going to present the tools for you as well. So this session is going to take 90 minutes. It's being recorded and is going to be available afterwards in our YouTube channel. And you're always welcome to use the chat to address any questions or to make any comments. We're always looking at the chat to see if there's something there. But in the meantime, yeah, just feel free to use the chat, okay? So, as I said, this is part of the learning series that the SI London Hub organized on February, the first session. And now we are here on the second module of systems change, second session of the systems change module. We're going to talk about tools and how we can visualize some of the ideas that we started talking about in our introduction in our last session. So here, as some of you requested last time, I've added the links to the next sessions here so you can take a look and yeah, join us for our next 4 sessions before we finish the learning series, okay? So we have the links here, so we're more than welcome to check those out. Here's a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. So a bit of this introduction, then I'm going to share with you for the ones that couldn't come, what we covered in our last session last week. Then just a little glimpse on the other modules there. We're not going to go too deep into today. We're just going to practice one, but it's good for you to know some other modules that we have available on the Systems Innovation Network as well. Then we're going to present more deeply the two loops module that we're going to just dive deep into. Then we have the breakout rooms. There's going to take 35 minutes. Then we're going to come back to the main room and then share some of the insights that you had during your discussion, and then some wrap up and next steps. Okay, so before we start, just want to check here the chat if everything is okay. If you all have the mirror board link, let me admit more people and share the link as well before we get started. Okay. All right, any questions so far? Don't think there are many things. Okay, that's good. So let's get started. Okay, so on our last session, here are just the 4 main topics that we covered last Wednesday, right? So the first thing that we talked about was this idea of transition. So what is transition? What is change? And what are some of the characteristics that we've identified last time? And where we can actually witness transitions taking place, right? In nature around us, in organizations, for example. Yeah, in our own bodies, in our own family. So these are some of the ideas that we brought up to last week. And here as well, we identified two types of transitions. So first, we talked about the linear type of transition, the ones that it's more changing in parts, that it's a quantitative change. So in the same way that a tree gets bigger, we can see that it's a linear type of change. But then we talked about this non-linear change as well, a change in the structure of the system that we're identifying. So here, for example, we can see that it's a different type of tree, right? So it's not the same structure as the one that we can see here. And we talked about, for example, the transition from being a teenager to being an adult, right? So these are some of the differences that we've identified last week as well. After that, we talked about the value of futures and foresights in the area of systems change. So when we talk about the future, we understand that there are possible scenarios that we can't really be certain about, but we can have some type of an understanding of what the future could be based on some of the hints that we have from the present, right? So the idea of futures and foresights that we identified last week as well. And briefly, we touched upon the Three Horizons framework. That is one of the modules that we have at the SI network to talk about change in system, and how here we could identify the three voices of change. The ones that are the aspirational voice, let's say, the ones that look to the desired future, the ones that are the business as usual, right? The ones that are the dominant systems, the ones that are looking to what is going on at the moment. And then we have these disruptive innovations that are going to, in a way, bridge both of these voices, the aspirational and the business as usual type of voice, and identify how the transition could take place. So this is a bit of what we've covered. And here we're going to just go a bit deeper into the three modules. And here we have, for each one of these quadrants, we have the link so you can access later the Three Horizons, the multi-level perspective, and the Two Loops module that we're going to cover more deeply today. Okay, so if you don't have any questions, I'll pass it over to Josh so he can start explaining a bit more about the Three Horizons and multi-level perspective.
Great, thank you, Yasmin. Good to see everyone here. I might just grab the screen there. Exactly as Yasmin said, continuing on from last week where we talked about transitions and transformation and the nature of systems change that looks a bit like this. When we transform the way a system is organized and the way it understands itself and its goals and ultimately the whole way it functions, we call that systems change. Like this caterpillar no longer walking around, but now up in the sky, flying around like a butterfly. It's the whole system structured in new ways, it's performing new functions, and that we call systems change. And that was a lot of ideas we talked about last week, and this week we're obviously talking about tools. So there's a number of different tools you could talk about, but these are three quite prominent ones that each focus on ultimately the same thing, a transformation that has similar characteristics across a wide variety of systems. And each kind of picks up on those characteristics in slightly different ways. So it looks at this these are very complex processes when you talk about systems change in something like a food system, in something like a national education system, in something like a financial system. These are very complex, multidimensional change processes that take long periods of time. And there's different ways of looking at that. There are obviously many, many different actors who have many, many different perspectives on what's going on. But we're, as systems changes, trying to step back a little bit and ask, following on from an understanding of the system and mapping it and so forth, asking what are the macro kind of patterns of change here that we can start to identify and start to work with those patterns of change, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do, trying to guide them and influence them in productive ways. So there's different ways of thinking about that, and these different frameworks are kind of structured in different ways. So last week we did take a brief look at this one, the 3 horizons, which is a popular tool for thinking about how systems change and thinking about the future. We can see it here. There are 2 axes, right? The bottom one is obviously time. So all transformations play out over time. And Bill Sharp, the creator of this, identifies at least 3 important dimensions and perspectives and categories of stakeholders within any transformation process. And those are these people here, which are business as usual, and they're keeping the lights on, they're running the existing system. They're the disruptive innovations, which are the drivers of change, the new innovations in the system. They could be technological, they could be changes in consumer values, they could be environmental factors, so on and so forth, but they are driving this system forwards and necessitating a change in some way. And then there'll be these guys who are the innovators and the aspirational future that we might want to see come into being. And those different dimensions will always be present in a macro scale transformation. And the question is, great, how do they then play out over time? And yeah, we can see them here, right? 3 different dimensions, and this is the framework, the framing of it. We obviously have time on the axis down here, but on this horizontal or vertical axis is an interesting one, because it's asking, what is the dominant pattern of organization in that system? What is the dominant way of organizing the resources and capabilities and components of that system towards its functional end? So if we took energy, we know we have a kind of dominant paradigm there about how we get the energy for powering our computers and so forth, our lights. And that's a pattern of organization. It has a certain structure to it. We know that it's quite linear and quite centralized. Most nation states have a few large energy companies, and we have a grid that, you know, produces energy at one end and sends it down some power lines, and we suck it out at the other end. And that's a particular structure to that system. It's a paradigm, we'd call it. And if you're high up on this axis, it means you are the dominant way of organizing that system. So you'll see at the beginning, time equals 0 down here. It's obviously business as usual. They're the ones that are running the system at the present. But the assumption in any transition or transformation is that business as usual is no longer fit for the future, and it's going to go downhill ultimately. It's just a question of what happens in that process of change. And what could happen is that business as usual manages to capture these disruptive innovations and harness it to perpetuate the incumbent system. And that wouldn't lead to the aspirational changes. Or it could be that these aspirational innovations manage to leverage and use these big changes to create a new world, new future that we might aspire to. And that's the 3 horizons framework. We looked at it last week. We won't go into it too much. But here's the canvas, and it's a very good exercise actually to help a group of people think about the future and the different perspectives of the actors that exist in the system right now, and help bring them together and have a conversation about what things look like and how change might play out. So that's that. Won't go into it. There's a guide there. There's a canvas there. You can explore it yourself. We'll stay going. This one here is the multi-level perspective. Another very, if you have any quick questions, I could maybe answer those, or are we okay at the moment? Yeah, looks like we're okay. Okay, I'll stay going. Multi-level perspective, another prominent framework used by researchers to understand macro changes within complex socio-technical systems. And that could be a transformation in, say, an energy system. We know that many countries are trying to move towards a very different energy architecture, right? Integrating renewables, moving to net zero and so forth. And that's a transformation that's currently playing out and will play out for a number of decades. And they're trying to understand that. So this is used by a number of national research centers that are trying to understand those kinds of changes, how governments, how different organizations might enable that, and what that change might look like. So this is produced by Frank Giels, Professor of Systems Innovation at Manchester University. And he came up with this model that says there's 3 levels to it. The multi-levels, at the top here, the landscape changes. There's a big macro changes that are going on out there in the world. Things like globalization, the rise of information technology, the environmental crisis, we might say, or climate change. These are big changes in the environment, so important that no one can ignore them, and they will inevitably require the system to change. In the center here is the regime, which is the pattern of organization, the dominant pattern of organization in that system. It's how things get done in the system. Down here are the niche, which are the innovations. And they're the home to the new way of doing things, new communities, new paradigms, new thinking, new technologies, whatever they may be. And the idea is that this can help us to understand, it's a theory of change about how these big macro changes up here. Here is a kind of an adapted version with a few additional aspects to it. But up here, you have the macro changes. And the idea is that those big changes may create windows of opportunity, which are opportunities that the incumbent system can't capture because of its way of organizing. The incumbent system is by definition designed for a world of the past. And if this is a transition, a new world is emerging, right? There are big changes up here, and it isn't set up to capture those in the way that these niche innovations are, because they're starting from now and they're looking into the future and they're trying to be adapted to these big changes up here. So the idea is that these big changes can create a window of opportunity that will disrupt the incumbent system because it's not able to capture them successfully. And these little innovations may be able to bubble up, develop, form, and ultimately break into the mainstream up here. This is the mainstream in society of how things are done. And if they're successful, they might actually be able to get networked and connected into a new way of doing things, a new way of organizing in that system, and ultimately disrupt and transform the incumbent to become the new regime, the new way of doing things in that system. And that's that. This canvas just kind of posits a few different dimensions to that. You can start asking, what is that incumbent system? What are those innovations? How do we actually nurture and develop them? What might this kind of transformation disruption look like? What that new system might look like? So on and so forth. You can see this is it here, this one with the main sections there you can fill out. So that's that. Hopefully it gave you a little teaser into the multi-level perspective. You'll find it on the website again. Do we have a link somewhere, Yasmin? I don't see one here. Maybe you can put it in the chat in case they need it. Yeah. Okay, I'll stay going. And we can look at this one here. This is the one we're looking at today, the Toulouse model. There's a question. Have you heard of this one? Maybe put in your chat if you've heard of it. Are you familiar with it from before today? Yep, Berkana Institute. Yep. Deborah Fries and Margaret Wheatley created this one. And you could call it a model, but they kind of call it a bit more like a story, or you might call it a heuristic. Heuristic is kind of a rule of thumb, a way of kind of structuring some general ideas. And it captures, like I said, all of these capture some aspect of a system's change. And the core of this is the idea of that in any change process, you have this, in a complex change process, you have this simultaneous aspect or parallel aspect of growth and decay, that an old system is dying and falling to pieces, and that a new one is growing and emerging. And we can certainly, straight away see the analogies with biological systems and ecosystems. Every year they go through this process, and their winter time comes and they start decaying, and the incumbent system starts to decay and fall to pieces. But we know also seeds are being sown for the next generation of that ecosystem. They're under the ground and they're waiting for the right context. It's springtime this time of year in Europe, and they'll start springing up. And we can see all around us in ecosystems how those larger trees, they reach their peak and then they collapse, and ultimately they decompose, right? That's the amazing thing about ecosystems. They fall back to the ground and creatures work on them and they decompose those resources, and they feed it back into the soil for the new system, for the seedlings to collect those resources and recombine them into a new pattern of organization. And that's why we think of ecosystems as so sustainable, right? In the sense, and they survive so long and perpetuate because they have that dynamic of being able to let go of the incumbent way of organizing the resources, and then those filter back into the soil, and use a new system starts to emerge over time with the new seedlings, recombine them in a new way. And that systems change. And they're using that analogy to think about how systems change in our economies, in our societies. So you'll see the top loop here is that incumbent system reaching its peak and then declining and falling to pieces. The bottom one is the emerging system starting here, and the seedlings of the new emerging, harnessing those resources, developing. Yasmin, did you?
Yeah, so here we have a video that will explain a bit more details about the two loops module. And then we can go to minute 3:34. Yeah, to just hear a bit of the module.
Navigate the loss of the old at the same time that we are supporting the new, aiming to create structures that will enable that. The two-loop model will help us with this, as it helps us to recognize the underlying dynamics at play. The model as a whole describes two loops. The first of these is used to represent the growth and subsequent decline of the existing incumbent systems. The second loop is used to represent the new emerging next generation of this system. The model as a whole describes the transition or process of nonlinear change from the old system to the new. By nonlinear, we mean that it is discontinuous. There is no linear set of steps that will take us from the old to the new, but instead, there exists some phase transition that engenders a qualitative change in the process of getting from the old to the new. Looking at the first loop, we can see its rise, peak, and fall. In this initial rise phase, something is being brought into the world, and it needs what we might call stewarding. It needs leadership, new structure, resources, and fostering. As this pattern develops and reaches its ascendancy, the system becomes the dominant mode of organization, the establishment. Those in the system become increasingly locked into a dominant paradigm that describes the world and the centrality of their place within it. At the peak is often a false sense of permanence, a delusion that things will go on getting better ad infinitum, with little imagination for any other possibility. Those farther from the center with an impartial view may well see the system is about to enter into decline. At this point, there may be the signs of the first divide in the system between those assuming things will continue as such forever, and those that start to plan for its demise. As time progresses and the system declines, those wedded to the regime will continue under the assumption that nothing has changed as the gap between their belief and the underlying reality widens. One could point to countless examples of this in business and politics. The providers of the mainframe computer could not see the personal computer coming. Dictators claiming their reign will go on forever just before their downfall. As the system enters into decline, what is now needed is hospicing. This requires attending to the emotional and spiritual needs of the individuals or organization, helping them to develop alternative narratives that let them accept reality and let go of the past. However, hospicing capacity will be limited if the system is still in denial. Finally, when an organism or organization dies, it needs to be decomposed, meaning that the resources that it contained for its operation need to be released back to the broader system for the generation of the new pattern. The fulfillment of this process takes a great effort of leadership, as it involves letting go of the past and giving over to the future system, giving up one's power, control, and resources to a new pattern of organization. This is something that we rarely see in organizations on a large scale. More often we see denial, resistance, and fighting before acceptance of the new. As the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer describes it, all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident. One colorful illustration of this is Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, and his evolving relationship with the digital currency Bitcoin. In early 2014, Dimon started his career in Bitcoin commentary at the World Economic Forum, labeling the cryptocurrency a terrible store of value and suggesting that the Wall Street Bank would stay as far away as possible. As he said, the question is, do we even participate with people who facilitate Bitcoin? Shortly after, he said, no government will ever support a virtual currency that goes around borders and doesn't have the same controls, adding, it's not going to happen. A little after, he came to the conclusion that it'll eventually blow up. It's a fraud, okay? The subsequent years saw a transition from denial and resistance to acceptance, until by 2019, JP Morgan had made a complete U-turn when the head of digital treasury services and blockchain at the bank said, "We have always believed in the potential of blockchain technology, and we are supportive of cryptocurrencies." In transitions, something new is always born. However, it may look very different from the old. What is important is that we try to grasp the full scope of change and not limit our imagination or ambitions. Often the old regime will get a sense for the new and try to copy it based upon the old logic, and many may well accept this as the new, even though it is still supported by an underlying system that is disintegrating. The example of JP Morgan's digital currency launched in 2019, over 10 years later than the creation of the original digital currency Bitcoin, may come to mind here. Or more broadly, we can think about the current state of financial technology, fintech, where incumbent banks that hear about the new and wish to be seen as innovative will buy some fintech startups to make their website or mobile app look flashy. Ultimately, it is the whole system that is falling to bits, and it is those that are outside of it that will really understand the full context of the new and build something that is aligned with that which will prevail. Sometime around the peak of the old system, new alternatives to the dominant approach emerge. Outside innovators are there because they saw the decline of the old and left. Or maybe because they have always been left.
Yeah, there was the video that we have that is part of the systems change course as well, but I wanted to share here because I think it's a very good explanation of this module and gave some examples that I think are very valuable to think about the the current state of the world that we live in. And as you're saying here, right, the economics, the politics, and we can see that thing in a different way. So if you want to go a bit deeper into exploring these modules, then yeah, we have here the links to the guide and the canvases as well that we're going to use today. But if you want to explore there afterwards, then the links is here as well.
Yeah, so there's some really interesting aspects about all of these three models, and I'd say the one for me, well, different dimensions to this one, that aspect of the simultaneous growth and decay I find very interesting, but also this discontinuous nature, the way there's no linear progression from one side to the other. There's this gap, this break in between that is non-linear, it's discontinuous, and that will be an aspect of all transition processes. There's no way of getting from the old to the new within the existing paradigm through a finite set of steps, which is very interesting because that's exactly what the incumbent system will be looking for. It will always be looking for that, right? When the new comes, a new paradigm, and they see the potential and value of it, they will always try, like, JP Morgan and so forth, to take the existing paradigm and continue it on, right? They don't like typically this idea of the decay, but actually all paradigms, all systems have a life cycle, and they will ultimately require them to release the resources back for a new paradigm, a new pattern of organization to emerge and harness those resources and build a new system. So it's a very interesting thing. We often, you might call that, death, right? That's the point where the existing system actually collapses, and we might call that there's crisis there. We know that crises are a key part of non-linear change and systems transformation and systems change. So we should always have that in mind, that there is no linear process from the incumbent system to the new system that doesn't require the paradigm to change, and this discontinuous aspect of the collapse of the existing regime, and then release of those resources back, and the new pattern of organization. That's what we're talking about when we say systems change. It's the emergence, the new pattern for connecting and interrelating and coordinating those resources towards new ends, right? The system starts to have a new understanding of what it does and its purpose and so forth, right? So purpose often comes into play in a big way when you get to those moments of crisis, and the system starts questioning itself and trying to understand what it's doing and why it's doing and so forth. So that's just to pick up on that. Maybe we'll stay going. Are we okay for time, or should I say a bit more here, Yasmin?
You could possibly, well, if anyone, do you have any questions or anything? There's not questions on the chat. So I think, yeah, we can stay going. If you want to explain the canvas, so we can, get on time there.
Yes, and Nick is just saying it's great heuristic for understanding the key factors that play in change. Hospicing and decomposing appear to me to be the hardest part, since it's disrupting what people think is a survival sometimes. Yeah, those are really interesting aspects of this model, where they emphasize the hospicing aspect, that we have to take care of the decomposing system and enable it to make a move to the new system. We'll talk about that now. But there's also this concept, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, of exnovation, which is the opposite of innovation. So innovation, we normally talk about the creation of something new. We don't talk about what has to die for that to emerge. And that's a very linear way of thinking. We just project things out into the future, right? We think things can just stay getting better, and we can stay getting bigger and stay creating more startups and so forth. System this here has an inherent recognition that actually something has to die. And exnovation is the looks at that letting go process, right? And we know we struggle with this a lot, particularly in public institutions and bureaucratic organizations. We stay creating more innovation labs or whatever it is, departments, but we find it very difficult to let go of the ones that need to be retired. And that's the whole hospicing thing. How can we take care? How can we enable the incumbent system to let go of its resources in a graceful way that enables those to be recomposed and for them to then refine themselves in the new system, right? For example, we know that our economies are changing hugely with automation and so forth, and a lot of people in organizations are not going to be needed to do what they did in the past. So how can we actually enable that transition to the new economy where they can find their place in it instead of creating all sorts of challenges and disruptions for ourselves and resistance and so forth because they can't see themselves in the new system. And that's what we're talking about by hospicing, letting those organizations decompose and the resources be brought into the new economy. And maybe I just stay going on from there. You'll find all about that in the guide there. There is, it's a theory of change that Margaret Wheatley and Deborah Fries talk about, how you can name and connect and nourish and illuminate the incumbent system. We'll look at that now, and there's important roles to be played in this. There's the actors who are stabilizing the existing system, which means these different models recognize, and I guess systems change has a recognition that we can't we can't actually make this transition without the incumbent system. We're not starting from scratch. We live in these very complex economic and social systems. And if they fall to pieces tomorrow, if business as usual doesn't function tomorrow, we're not going to survive. We can't make this transition. We're back in the Stone Age. So how do we actually stabilize and enable what's needed from the incumbent system at the same time as we have these innovators who are building the new, and the bridges who are connecting from the old to the new? So this analogy of repurposing or rebuilding an airplane whilst you're flying it is a really good one, right? It's not that we're building an airplane from scratch on the ground in the warehouse and we can just put it all together. We're in an airplane that is the incumbent system, and if it doesn't stay flying, if the engines don't stay running, then we're all dead. It's game over, right? So we've actually got to rebuild that thing as we're flying along. And that's why we need these people here, the stabilizers, right? The people who are looking out for the engine and make sure it's still running, and the pilots. But we need the innovators to start changing things quick, and we need the people to connect between them so that we're all in the same system and we can start moving together. And this is it here, right? So this kind of captures those different dimensions. It's the canvas we're going to work on today. We can see on the top left there. Do you want me to go through the different boxes, Jasmine, or what's fun?
Yes, you can give a quick overview of the boxes. Yeah.
Okay, so on the top, we've got the incumbent system. So here we want to ask questions about what does it look like, right? It's risen here, and then it's going to decline over here. So maybe I'll skip through to, these are the new innovations here. Just to check. Yeah, okay. So these are the new innovations here, and we want to think about what are those. The beginning of this process starts with naming them, being able to identify what are these new innovations. So Deborah Fries gives a presentation on YouTube if you search for this, giving the example of renewable technologies and alternative energy sources. And this was back in the 1960s or 70s when we didn't really know what solar and what wind and all of these were. So you got to go and name them, right, before they understand they're actually part of the same thing. And then, so that's the pockets of the future here, right? What are these new opportunities? How do we name them? Down here is how do we connect them into a new system? What are the activities we do there? What is the emerging system that's growing here? What does that start to look like? How can we nourish and develop it? What does it look like when it becomes a system of influence, when it becomes the new paradigm in the system? And how can we illuminate that back to the old system so it can start to see the potential and opportunities to start making that transition? So those that's the bottom loop. And then we've got this bridging, which is how do we bridge between the new system and the old to really enable the old system to start making that transition and redirecting the resources to the new system. We've got what we talked about, hospicing. How do we hospice the old system, which is essentially taking care of it like we take care of our parents when they get very old, right? How do we enable it to gracefully and successfully let go of the resources and start to see itself a place in the new system and how it can enable that. And then the decomposing here is the actual enabling the decomposing of the existing system, which is that letting go process. So that's that. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you, Joss. So now I will create the breakout room. So what is going to happen? So you can see that there's a challenge sticky there. So you choose the challenge that you and your group would like to focus on during this breakout session. And you can start with the top left loop and start identifying what is the incumbent system that the challenge that you identified is a part of. And then you go from pockets of the future and then naming justice, adding the numbers here so we can go in this order. And then you can identify the representative that is going to come back to the main room afterwards to share the main insights that you had from the discussion in the breakout rooms. Okay. So we have 30 people here. Might create a few more breakout rooms so you can have a better discussion with less people in the rooms. Let me quickly do that. So I can create possibly 6 breakout rooms or add 2 more. So we can have everyone joining. Okay. Great. And just duplicate these 2. Great. All right, I will create the breakout rooms now. And if you are in the breakout room 1, then you go to the to this first board here. If you're in the breakout room 2, then you go to the second one and so forth. Okay. Any questions so far? Don't think there's any questions in the chat.
Should I put a timer on 35 minutes?
Yeah, exactly. And create the rooms. Okay, good. All right.
There's a question there. There's a question about where are the challenges. So people discuss and choose this when they enter the room. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. You can take 2 to 3 minutes maybe to identify what is the challenge that the group would like to focus on during the session. All right. Okay, so I'll open the rooms. And if you have any more questions, there's a space for you to add messages for us so we can answer them. All right. So see you very soon. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the main session. Let me just check the other breakout rooms. Okay, I think we're all here. Great. So, yeah, since we don't have much time, I think I just wanted to know a general perspective on how did you find this canvas to address the challenges that you've identified? And yeah, if you want to share anything more specifically, you can use the chat, but it's just a general overview on how did you find the canvas to understand better the challenges you've addressed. Okay, so we'll start here in the group one. Let me share my screen. Okay, so breakout room one, how did you find the canvas to just play around with the ideas and share with your colleagues some ideas? Representative of the group?
Yeah, probably in our case it was difficult because of the connection, the not stable connection. And in my case, I tried to add it, but they say you're not able to add it to the canvas. Probably this is my first time, so I need to figure out how to use it. But probably that is a way. And having just, in my case, just a screen, not a double screen, is difficult to go back and forth. But
sure. Okay, yeah, so it was more internet problems, right? And communication problems. Yeah, okay. Well, we can always come back here and explore a bit more.
I keep getting problems, but you see the labels that we put there, right? Essentially, we were dealing with health system between essentially here in Ontario, US and Britain.
Yeah.
Although they are not functioning exactly in the same manner, I think that they all had the same problem in common, and that is they're cumbersome, expensive, and they're not delivering the healthcare that is needed. And that the other thing is that, I mean, the canvas was useful to call upon it, to guide the thinking. So I did find it useful, and also useful to realize there are elements of this new developing, which are just not there for something new to develop. There is so much resistance that unless that resistance is broken, whatever new innovations are decided or created or thought of, then they have no chance.
Yeah.
And it all boils to the power of controlling the money that goes into healthcare.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter which system.
Great.
Okay, so that's basically where we are, because some of these the points, well, they don't make sense yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, once you have more time to explore a bit further, then it can possibly make a bit more sense. But thank you, Pedro, Alessandro.
Yeah. Thanks, Jasmine.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alessandro.
So group two, generally, how did you find the canvas and the exercise?
Quite interesting. And, we were very lucky that Raji came with a case, which was very interesting. It took us a moment. It took us a moment to get to grip with it. But I mean, it's useful to, it takes a while to kind of think about that up on the upside, 11, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we kind of went well into that left-hand side. And then we kind of, in the middle, we were kind of needed to be thoughtful. Yeah, very good. Very interesting. The case, just broadly, was about transitioning so let's say physical organizations with where value is delivered as a transaction into a new world where anything as a service triggers the need to think about value as relational, and moving an organization towards, let's say, being able to deliver a continuous value exchange. And the bridging piece was very interesting in thinking about, so people that do not have digital capabilities and digital know-how and are capable with this kind of customer interaction, how do they kind of behave? And then Raju was really key in pointing out that the value of people that do not transition fully is the relationships that they have built with customers. So how could we augment? And that's kind of where we got to. But really interesting to see what we could move to in just half an hour. Thank you very much, Raji and Eduardo.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Group 2. So let's quickly just go to Group 3. And the last one before we wrap up. So just generally, how did you find the tool? Group 3.
I think it's great. We couldn't stop talking because we were so excited about the different frameworks and identifying the problems and different solutions. Like, I feel like we could have spent another hour easily just getting up to number 4 or 5. Digging into all of so the tool is great to stimulate conversation.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Group 3. Then we didn't have a formed Group 4. So Group 5, well, they had a bit of a problem with internet as well and communication. So it didn't go too deep. So I'll leave you to, come back here and then explore the tool a bit better once you have, better internet connection, and you can, maybe group together again with the same people to explore this tool a bit deeper. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here and for participating in another learning session with us. So the main topics that we covered today, the overview of our last session, then the presentation of the 3 modules of systems change, and a bit of an experience of the 2 loops module as we did in the breakout rooms. So here, if you want to identify any takeaways that you think are relevant for other people to know, you can put up your stickies here. And we always read this part afterwards, okay? Here are some useful resources for you to explore a bit deeper. So the systems change introduction from last week, if you want to come back to the Miro board, here's the link. Here's a very interesting presentation from the authors of the 2 loops module. They're presenting the loops here, and this is a very good video to watch afterwards as well. Here's the link for the systems change course, as I mentioned before. That is part of that of this course is there's that video that we've watched today. So if you want to watch that video again or watch other related videos, you can find it here. The other links that weren't working before, I've added here as well. And if you want to add any useful resources that you have and you want to share with other people, then you have a space to do that here. Okay. And yeah, here our next session, systems change case study. So we're going to talk with a professional about their experience on systems change, and this is going to be an hour next week, so on the 24th. So happy to see you all again next week as well. So here you have the link on the top. Okay. So to finish off our session, here you have, as always, the links to the website, the LinkedIn, the Twitter, and here the YouTube channel as well, that we put the recordings of all the sessions that we create with the London Hub. So you can access the YouTube channel here, and we have the recording of this session until the end of the week on the YouTube as well. And here is always the feedback. So 3 main questions, as you always have. Did you get a good understanding of the concepts today? Was the format of the session effective in helping you understanding the content, and any ideas on how we can improve? So you can just bring these dots to this line here, and here are some sticky notes if you want to identify any ideas for us to improve and do something different. Okay, so thank you very much everyone for participating. Sorry, we went a bit over time, but yeah, you have the recording afterwards to review, and you're always welcome to come back to this Miro board to explore deeper this tool. Is always very challenging to explore in just 30 minutes, but yeah, you can always come back here. Okay, so that's it for today, everyone. Take care, have a good day, and we'll see each other next week. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Jasmine.